So I am Charlotte Garnett. I'm known as the anti-anxiety jeweler, primarily because I make jewelry that is utilizing mindfulness and grounding techniques to facilitate living with anxious disorders on a day-to-day basis.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the type of jewelry you design?
Yes,
really interesting.
Sure. The jewelry that I design always focuses around how to best use their tactile elements to help you get through anxious behaviors and how to best live your life on the day-to-day basis. So it focuses on things like grounding techniques via their pointed elements, or via mindfulness through the ergonomic design of them. So when I was doing my research, I realized that through a lot of testing, there are 6 different sort of shapes in the base shapes that work with every type of different anxious fiddling fingers. Everyone's fingers move in a different way when they're anxious and when they're overstimulated. So by finding those different shapes and those different ways that people's fingers move, I've been able to identify different types of jewelry and different types of ergonomic design that naturally guides people's fingers across the jewelry and actually helps them to be mindful without having to consciously take that action. It's something that's there with you. Jewelry is a really portable medium by its very nature. So you're always able to access it and you don't have to put all that extra energy into trying to practice mindfulness. It's then something that comes naturally.
Very cool. And just out of curiosity, what made you get into designing this type of jewelry?
So when I started designing anti-anxiety jewelry, I was already in a jewelry design course in St. Martin's, and I'd recently been diagnosed with anxiety. I've had a history of anxious disorders like eating disorders and depression as well, but that was when I actually got diagnosed with general anxiety disorder, and it was a very all-consuming thing for me. And while I was trying to present other ideas to my tutors about my final year's work and focus, they were saying, yeah, something else is clearly on your mind. And obviously it was all that was on my mind. And once that penny had dropped of, I'm an artist, I can actually use this, what is all consuming to me, to be my inspiration instead of shying away from it and having to try and lock it into a different facet of myself. I have that means to actually explore that and look into it. And then the next realization for me was after I'd started to look into it and realizing there really was, at the time back in 2014, there really was no anti-anxiety jewelry apart from historical things like the worry beads, traditional prayer beads, things like that. Then I started to realize, okay, instead of just exploring it in the way I had with art previously, when I was a teenager, I used to keep a art diary instead of just a written diary, just to express myself and get it out. I could take the next step from just simply expressing myself and having that cathartic experience to making something practical. So that's when I started looking into all of the studies and the actual psychology behind it. And I discovered that a lot of my behaviors were linked to stimming, which was something that as a bystander, I'd attributed only to autism. And then when I actually started to look into it, realizing how much it applied to all of us, anxious or not, and realized quite how vast the applications of this were. And so after really going deep into all of the psychological reasoning and all of the theories, that's when I started to join the 2 parts together of my experience personally and how cathartic it is to let that out in art form into the practicalities of, okay, what can I do with my medium to help contribute to solving this? So while I'm speaking at the conference, I'll be focusing on how I came to start making my jewelry, my personal experiences within the mental illness community, and how I found that and how that's led me to make the jewelry that I make. I also want to talk about the actual practical applications and how the jewelry is applied to treating a mental illness as a support mechanism, and developing positive coping mechanisms and making things like mindfulness more approachable for a lot of people that have found it a really unapproachable thing to do, and how that can be incorporated into the day-to-day. And then also understanding how this behavior affects us all. So how stimming is a part of almost all of our daily lives, whether we've recognized it or not, and how mindfulness can help with that, and how grounding techniques can help with that. Whether or not we identify as mentally ill or not, we can all benefit from looking after our minds.
All right. And then why are you looking forward to It Takes All Kinds of Minds?
I'm looking forward to it because it signifies community, and I think it's so valuable to have that sense of community and to bring together lots of different perspectives on a topic, lots of different experiences of a topic, because no two people are going to experience the same thing the same. No two people, even with the same disorders, will experience them the same. And I think it's such a complex topic that a lot of different people are needed to make our response to it balanced and work for everyone. And on top of that, it's nice to have the camaraderie. It's nice to be able to know that you're not alone. Even after you've been involved in the community for years, it's always nice to meet other people with different perspectives on it, just so that you feel comfortable in your place in the world and that you know that you aren't alone, and that there are loads of different people out there who are just as passionate as you are about looking into these things and making people more aware of them and making a better life for all of us. I think neurodiversity is a really valuable word that we have been given. It's a great term to be able to use now. I was trying to explain this to my own mum the other week, why I now refer to myself as neurodivergent as opposed to mentally ill, how I've always referred to myself. And I think it simply comes down to hope and positivity around the subject. And that goes into destigmatization of the subject as well. We've historically been told as a society that mental illness is something bad. There's something wrong with you, and it's something to be afraid of, for both the people in your vicinity and for yourself. It's something frightening and it's something negative. So once we've got to the point that we have looking at mental illness and mental health, moreover, it's not a negative, scary, dark thing that we should all be keeping a secret. And we all know now that the way forward is to talk about it, is to be open and honest about it. So having a term like neurodiversity really highlights what it actually is and the real truth of the matter, which is that we are simply different. We are all diverse in our minds and the way that we think, and that's not a bad thing, because that's where creativity, imagination, all different kinds of ways of looking at things, most geniuses will be diverse in their way of thinking. So it's not a bad thing. And I think having a term that isn't an inherently bad term that uses illness in it, because not all of these things are illness, that's not to say that we don't suffer, but we are just simply different. And I think it's a much better descriptor for what we actually are as a community.